in dangerous and vulnerable situations. I work with people who are in that situation, and I think that we need to really give consideration to everybody. The old, the young, the vulnerable. Our welfare state is about caring for people. It doesn't mean that everybody has to aspire to the same thing. We are a diverse community, a diverse country. Let's respect that individuality.
Second topic, a question that's about climate change, and that comes from Keith Atke.
Many of us, including those who are concerned about the effects of climate change, are unimpressed by the efficiency of wind farms. What efforts, what do the candidates feel should be done to investigate more efficient means of providing low carbon energy other than nuclear? And my reason for asking this question is that in my experience, people who are sceptical about green technology focus on the inefficiency of wind farms to the exclusion of other options.
I'll answer it for Patterson. Frappy.
Yeah, as you'll be aware, we've had a Lib Dem Cabinet Secretary over at Energy, Ed Davey, for the last 5 years. And what he's done essentially is try and bring about a wind farm revolution. For too long we have relied on the old sort of coal and oil industries, and it's destroying our planet. You'll hear from some other parties on this panel tonight that it's an issue that just needs to be sort of tucked away. It's not worth talking about. Give it and put it away for the next generation. And I just think this is so, at a time when we need to be thinking about what we're going to leave for the next generation, looking after our planet is something that needs to be at the forefront of our minds. Thinking about the planet doesn't make you a member of the Green Bloc, as Mr. Patterson will call you. All it does is make you concerned about the legacy you leave for your children. And I think stuff really needs to be done. And Ed Davey has started that over at the Energy Department. On wind farms, I'm lucky to have a family connection. My cousin is a senior wind farm engineer at a wind farm factory on the Isle of Wight. It's actually the biggest wind farm factory in Europe, I believe. And I know there's some great work going on over there to try and improve the efficiency, because of course, you're right, the issues of inefficiency, what they do is they lead to the climate change skeptics saying, oh, there's no point, it'll never work, you'll never get the wind farms working to produce enough electricity. So the Lib Dems have got a really pioneering idea for a science fund, a renewable energy science fund, which will draw upon expertise from across the political spectrum to try and do something about the green revolution that's needed to be done. You'll see in the manifesto coming out tomorrow morning from the Lib Dems a pledge for 5 green laws, and these 5 green laws will, we think, go some way to protecting the planet for the future generations. Something needs to be done. If you vote in the Lib Dems, we will fight to protect this planet.
Sorry, me?
Yeah,
I ran there in the way, I couldn't see you, sorry. I was really hoping I was going to go after Owen. Because I'm a Labour candidate, right? You know that because I've got a badge on. And I went to the farmers' hustings last Thursday. And the fact that I'm here is a good thing, isn't it? So they were very great. Well, not obviously to you. It is to me though. They were very gracious, and my skin was intact when I left. Owen said at that point, he said, the biggest thing since the Sheriff of Nottingham, the biggest transfer of money from the poor to the rich was wind farms, and he talked about bungs to farmers as they have wind farms on their land, and yet subsidies from the poorer constituents who are effectively subsidising it through electric bills. I've got to say, the biggest transfer of wealth in this that we've seen was the transfer of wealth, the £3 billion that happened with the tax breaks to millionaires when this government came in, and that meant £85,000 to each individual millionaire based on the change in tax breaks. But what I'd say, in terms of the use of wind farms, the problem is we need to get the science right, and we need to work out how we're going to do this. We're not going to, for example, I oppose the huge, monstrous one in Tetchell, which is not far from where I live, near Ellesmere. We've got to get it right. We've got to get a balance between the environment and the use of wind farms. What I'd say is we need to look at the science around climate change. You need to get clear answers from your two candidates here from UKIP and the Tory party about what their views are on climate change. The Labour Party has been a leader on addressing climate change. We're going to take back the 2030 decarbonisation target, which we set in government. It's going to be about how we move forward to a realistic energy policy that meets everybody's needs. But what we had, when we had the Secretary of State who had climate change, he didn't even seek the advice about climate change from his senior economic advisor. He literally took the advice from other people, and he was quoted as saying, climate change can't be a bad idea. Sometimes it might be quite, as in other words, I'm not sure what we bring to Oswestry by the seaside might be quite a good idea. I'm not sure what he meant. But we've got a situation where we do have serious people denying climate change within government, and we need to address it through the decarbonisation targets that the Labour Party is putting forward. But we need to do it in a realistic way. And I'm not sure that we need to find a way of doing it that isn't necessarily sticking huge monoliths on our landscape. I don't know, that might not be the right answer.
Before we do hear from you from the Conservatives, we'll hear from Duncan Clark from the Green Party.
Okay, the question was about the efficiency of wind turbines and the efficiency.
It wasn't about the efficiency of wind farms. Do you mind me interrupting? Because so far the candidates haven't answered my question.
Exactly.
Which was the importance of investigating other options, of which there are many, and one very rarely hears about. But there are a lot of very efficient alternative options which don't appear to be given sufficient prominence. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
No, interrupt away.
That's useful clarification. Let me talk about the other options then, because I do think we've got into a situation with an unbalanced energy policy. And that's come about because the government's auctioned renewable energy commitments and has given them away to the lowest cost at the time. And I don't think that feels sustainable. It hasn't provided the pump priming that we are now seeing in terms of solar energy. Solar energy has got enormous potential to deliver renewable energy in the future, but it needs pump priming to establish that. And we could be world leaders in that technology. So solar's got huge potential. Wave power, 8% of UK energy needs could be met from a series of just 8 lagoons. One is being tried in Swansea. We haven't seen investment into that. We're an island, for goodness sake. We've got enormous potential from there. Combined heat and power, we haven't explored that properly. And most importantly, we've got some of the leakiest houses in Europe to start with. So there are still millions of houses out there without even basic loft insulation. So we're not getting the basics right, which is to start from a warm, secure house where you can minimise the amount of energy it takes. In terms of actually, because there's a bit of a concern over efficiency, the official data on the efficiency of a wind turbine is about 70 to 85%. Over the winter, nuclear power, well actually, only 70 to 85% of nuclear power plants have actually been generated, the rest have been shut down because of problems with cracks in the reactor cores. So no system for generating electricity is completely reliable. We do need to invest in energy storage. There are countries out there, like Costa Rica, who are now meeting 100% of their energy needs from renewables. Denmark, for several months last year, met 100% of its energy need from renewables. We are in danger of lagging behind. We started a lot of this, we were early exponents of it, but we've lost a lot of headway. There is a route forward, but instead of paying, and I do agree with Owen on this, in the sense of instead of paying for large cash payments to large rich landowners, we should have gone down the route of community-owned and community-benefited renewable energy technology. And in Shrewsbury, they're putting a hydroelectric scheme alongside the Weir. If you think back, if you look at any old maps, you'll realise we used to have hundreds, thousands, millions of water mills in this county generating power. Hydroelectric power at a small scale is extraordinarily efficient. And it's one of the major reasons that Costa Rica have produced 100% of their energy needs. So yes, you're right to say we have not explored all the other options. It's become a wind farm or nothing policy. That's as a result of the government not taking this issue seriously enough and just saying, oh my God, we've committed ourselves to do something, let's do something at the lowest possible cost. That wasn't the way forward. Installation for stock was the way forward. and then a far more holistic approach to energy generation.
Just to remind us of the question, it was what efforts are being made to investigate more efficient means of providing low carbon energy other than nuclear? So Andrew,
just on the clarification, just because I had misinterpreted the question. I mentioned the Lib Dem investment scheme, the science scheme. That is cross-platform. That is to encourage scientific research into wind power, into solar power, into wave power. I apologise, I hadn't quite interpreted your question. We think wind power is important, but we absolutely agree as a party that there needs to be research into all these forms, and that's what our Science Investment Fund will do, hopefully.
Okay, I'm on this point.
Okay, well, we're committed to getting rid of subsidies for wind farms and solar arrays because we think the national grid can't actually cope with fluctuating supply. It needs wind farms need store backup, which at the moment is diesel generators, so that's not low carbon. We support a diverse energy market, including nuclear, geothermal, tidal, some solar, although in northern latitudes like this, they're not as good as if we were in Spain with constant sunshine, conventional gas and oil. We would also like to see industrial units providing on-power generation. If you've got a large industrial site with huge roofs, then yeah, solar power might be the way for you to go. So, and if shale gas extraction should go ahead, if any community improvement levy money from that development must be earmarked for spending in the area where it is and local community projects on it.
I mean, that's some darling rubbish during some answers here, so what's your view?
Well, if anyone wants to know what I think in detail, go to my think tank website, UK 2020, or go to the Global Warming Policy Foundation website, because I gave quite a major speech about all this back in about September. And I loved hearing these stories of what I did about people who weren't in the room when I was actually in the room. When I was doing DEFRA didn't do climate change. DEFRA did adaptation. We published a massive report on that. I didn't have to get my scientist in every week to talk about climate change. I met him every week anyway, because we had regular meetings. It was the two, actually, because I think interesting, Mr. Chris Hoon has been wiped out of Lib Dem history. There were two Secretary of State. One went to jail, one carried on. They both had an absolute clear belief in this stuff. And you know, I've got to respect them. They've absolutely stuck to their guns on this. And they were very, very keen on pursuing the extensive use of wind as a means of generation of renewable energy. Now, my view was pretty simple. This technology peaked sometime in the late Middle Ages. It doesn't work. The coldest day of January this year, which was a still cold day, it generated 1% of our energy needs. So every ridiculous subsidised wind turbine, which does horrible environmental damage, chopping up birds, putting off epileptics, damaging people's telephone reception, endangering helicopters of Aria Shawbury, every one of those has to have a carbon-based backup. Now, this country, that'd probably be gas. But if you run a gas power station off and on, that's very inefficient. You actually create more CO2. So the whole wind thing is a complete scam. And I'm happy to repeat again, this is the biggest scam since the Sheriff of Nottingham. It transfers money from my poorest constituents to my wealthiest constituents, who are clobbered. People are clobbered on their electricity bills. There's no way escaping this. They are done a significant bill which is going to go up for this completely pointless technology where wealthy farmers, wealthy landowners pick up huge sums of money. There's an enormous bung to our wealthiest landowners for nothing, doing real environmental damage. You go to mid Wales now, there is virtual insurrection at plans which Davies put on hold to build huge wind farms in some of the last really isolated parts of the UK. And I've got a insurrection going on near Oswestry, where the power lines are going to come across, quite rightly, so we'll get all the downside of the pylons and none of the upside. So, to answer the question, yes, at DEFRA, given my views, I very much launched a serious investigation into the alternatives. Otherwise, I'd get attacked as a denier and all this awful rude nonsense we have the whole time. So, I've looked at all of them, and Duncan will be appalled to hear that I agree with him on some of them. He's absolutely right. If you look at the River Severn, pretty well all the way up, there are weirs where there used to be a water mill, and then there used to be a lock system to get the boats up. And we could actually, and in fairness to myself, I got all the Shropshire people, we got the river, everyone up the river, the councils together, a big meeting about 10 years ago to look at this. We could make the River Severn navigable again, and with inflatable weirs made by my marvellous constituent, Mr. Lindstrand in Oswestry, we could have these demountable weirs, and you could generate electricity. So there is probably more to be squeezed out of hydro. Not that much, but there is definitely. Scotland's pretty well taken up. And if you look at our renewable figures, Scotland still dominates with hydro. So yes, there is some of the hydro, but you've got to be careful about fish stocks. I spent a lot of time when I was the shadow on fishing. You can do terrible damage. As in Northern Ireland, yes, there is some potential on tidal. And I would agree with Duncan on that, but there's a real problem with metallurgy still. I mean, the tides around Ireland are incredibly strong. There's a 12-knot tide each way every 12 hours into Strangford Lough, and they've got trial turbines there, but the metallurgy is really struggling because of obviously the salt and the saline conditions. We're not there yet. Duncan mentioned solar. What I saw at solar, complete waste of time. It's maximum 10% efficient. So what I came down with, the only really reliable one, apart from hydro, where you've got water running 24 hours a day, was actually anaerobic digestion, but on waste. And I was emphatic, and we were working with the Lib Dems and my old ministers on this to see how we can make sure we did not subsidise burning food, because what's happening in Germany, I think, is disgusting. When significant numbers of people died of hunger last year, it is absolutely wrong and immoral, I think, to burn either animal quality food or human quality food. But we throw away 15 million tonnes of food as waste in this country. Going to landfills, a shocking practice. That could go to anaerobic, and we could do a lot more with farm waste. So that actually is what I came down on. But it's all peanuts compared to the volume of energy we need. The Climate Change Act is required 80% reduction on 1990 figures by 2050. I bet hardly any of you realise that means scrapping all petrol and diesel vehicles, all of them. It means scrapping all diesel, coal and gas heating. It means scrapping all gas heating for cooking. See where we're going? It's simply either going to happen and people are going to die, or it's not going to happen. And the only two options left are a huge investment in nuclear, and I couldn't find enough substantial sites with access to enough cold seawater, similar to as that required by Hinkley C, to deliver the required amount of energy. And that means you fall back on this staggering volume of wind turbines. I came up with a figure of 90,000 wind turbines, but even that wouldn't work because on that miserable cold still day in January, they wouldn't be working. So sometime, the world's going to wake up to this enormous scam, because Tom talks about catastrophe down the road. I'm happy to accept the theory. I discuss it with my scientists in DEFRA. It's just not happening. Temperatures have not increased. There has not been a significant increase in temperature for the last 18 years.
So what's happening to the Arctic then?
The poors can join the army. The poors can pay its taxes. The poors can get married. That's how long it's gone on for.
Put my hand up.
And they're really struggling to come up with theories as to why this has happened, because we saw a rise in temperatures leading up to in the early part of this century without a big increase in CO2. Then we saw a drop. We've seen another very similar rise. These are very, very marginal increases in temperature. And what we should remember is that 40,000 people died in this country this winter because of fuel poverty. And that is what we should also remember, is that we do have a fantastic, God-given chance in shale. Shale has reduced the American emissions of CO2 to levels not seen since the 1960s, and it has also enabled whole industries to come back to America, which are no longer viable in places like China. So, given our very strict regulatory regime here, I strongly recommend that that is one of the options we look at. And then the last thing, which
not in your backyard,
is combined heat and power. Most of our power stations, 45% of the heat goes straight up the chimney. There are really good examples like Freiburg in Germany, and very interesting stuff has been done in Massachusetts. If you go to, I won't go on too long now, but if you go to my speech, that was one of the other key pillars. What they effectively do there is sell heat and give away the electricity for free. And that is something we should really be looking at. We should much more efficient use of our power stations through combined heat and power.
Fairly briefly, doesn't tell us to come up with a couple of
Do they all have their water setting on fire?
The world has warmed in the last 18 years. To deny that is flying in the face of the evidence. And that's all the organisations.
Yeah.
14 warmest years have occurred since the year 2000. Last year was the warmest year on record for the world temperatures. So to try and stand here or sit here and deny that is treating you for madness. The reality is the world is warming. And if you look at the consequences of that, you can see in terms of the Arctic ice, the rate of loss there are exceeding the expectations. If you look at the acidification of the oceans, it's exceeding the expectations. So we're not perfect. We haven't got another world to play around with where we can put a little bit more carbon in and see the result of it. We work with climate modelling, but we are well within those expectations. Now you can take a huge gamble and say, well, I don't think it's going to get any worse. We'll go for a moderate bit of warming. That doesn't sound too bad. We don't live on sub-Saharan farms where we'll be starving as a result of that. We'll put up with that. We can inflict that on the world. Or we can take a more responsible attitude, which is to say, we've only got one world. It is the lives of our children and our children's children we're gambling with here. We can live within 2-degree warming, because that's what we're talking about, not stopping warming. We're trying to limit it to a 2-degree warming. We can decarbonise the economy. It will not be easy, but good grief, compared to the other things we've overcome, the technology is there to do it. There's a few things Owen didn't mention. There's things like geothermal, getting warm water out from the groundwater, which is working very effectively in many areas. And we've really got very little choice but to do this for our own sake and for the sake of future generations as well. Finally, on the subsidy, because I think it's a big issue that's talked up as though we're paying, thousands of pounds in subsidy for wind farms. It works out at £18 per household. Yes, it might be too much. I'm concerned, as Owen is concerned, about it's going to the wrong people, but actually we're talking about £18 per family per year. We're not talking about hundreds of pounds. It is factually, and this is from the department, his own Department of Energy and Climate Change, it is £18 as a subsidy we're paying.
And that's why he was sacked, because he didn't know his figures.
Yeah, I'd like to say that this is the danger, I think, of a Conservative majority government, a party that is refusing to take climate change seriously. It's shocking. I think it's scandalous. I think it needs to be stopped. I really do.
That's why he was sacked.
I'm glad you find it funny, Owen.
I don't like your David Cameron promised the greenest government ever. And in fact, this will surprise you, it has actually been the greenest government ever. And the reason for that is not because of David Cameron, it's because of the Liberal Democrats fighting the Conservatives tooth and nail to try and secure some investment for the renewable energy that we need in this country. To ignore it, to say it's not happening, is scandalous. And if ever we see a betrayal of the people, I think it really is here. Something needs to be done about climate change. The Lib Dems have fought for this. We've got 5 green laws on the front page of our manifesto coming out tomorrow. I urge you all to look at them because they're a really, really great way of trying to do something about this threat to the world that we leave our children.
Okay, I think we're going to
the climate has been changing for centuries and thousands of years. You go to the Holocene, the Arctic was completely melted. There were beaches in the Arctic. You've had times when there were vineyards well into northern Europe. You had the Vikings going across to Greenland growing crops. And then you had the Little Ice Age when the Thames froze over. So we've had these ups and downs. But what has happened, and it's bitterly disappointing for all those on my left, I know it's embarrassing, we've not had the increase in temperatures predicted by all the doomsters. There's been a very, very modest increase. It is no different to the increase we had in the first part of the years of this century. My beef when I was doing environment was that there was this huge concentration on this one issue, where there is terrible damage done to the environment by these appalling wind farms, and we were ignoring the bigger issues, which are of much more relevance now to our environment. And it's been an enormous distraction. That is my real beef. We do have very serious environmental problems which we have to address, and this huge issue has become an enormous scam. And it is driven by subsidy. The figures I had, actually, it's £90 per bill. It's going to go up to massively above that in the next few years. And I lost my battle with the Liberal Democrats on getting the subsidy reduced. I'll be simple about that. We're very clear as a government, that as a party, that we're going to stop the subsidies because these wind farms are not delivering. So to go back to the question, there are some alternatives. Combined heat and power, quite right to mention thermal. We could possibly do more hydro, not a lot more. And I do think there's a real merit in looking at anaerobic. But just get the whole thing in perspective. All this stuff that I'm some sort of evil creep and denier. Just look at the facts. The temperature's been fluctuating up and down for centuries without any great increase in CO2. We have a very, very significant increase in CO2, I agree with that, and it has not led to the predicted increase in temperature predicted by the doomsayers. And there are much bigger things to worry about in the environment.
One last question, which I think...
And that's why David Cameron sacked him.
And it's a question about defence.
Which party will commit to allocate at least 2% of GDP to defence spending as NATO requests? And I ask this in view of the threatening gestures being made at the present time by Russia.
Okay, we'll start at this end of the table, I think.
Oh, you starting with me? Okay. The Labour Party would seek to continue to stick to the 2%. But as we know, when we're looking at how we balance the budget and look at where we make changes, we need to look at the defence budget as well. And there are serious choices and decisions to be made. And those decisions and choices need to be made based on what the strategic threats that we identify for us are. We probably need to consider, we're talking about a proliferation of asymmetrical war. We're not talking about a huge nuclear confrontation with the USSR as we remembered it in the days when we were all spending our time thinking about mutually assured destruction. We need to look at our armed forces as being focused for the purposes that we need them. Labour Party is committed to seeking to maintain the NATO commitment, but reflecting that defence cuts will have to also be in the way, as with other parts of the budget, will have to be also considered. So it's the commitment. None of the parties are making a commitment to maintain the 2%, because that's been a big hoo-ha that's just happened within the coalition. So the Labour Party similarly has not said we are going to stick to the 2%, but the intention would be to seek to maintain the appropriate defence of the realm as we need it, based on what our defence needs and our current international situation is.
Andrea Allen, your response to Alison's question?
Well, the answer, Alison, is that UKIP will definitely commit to spending 2%. We believe that the first priority of any government is defence of the realm, and at the moment, the forces are being run down. They're overstretched. They're being sent here, there, and everywhere. They're thin. They've not got the enough good equipment, and we want to resource fully our military assets, our personnel. We believe that people who are prepared to stand up and protect the country, and we're talking about defence, not offence, deserve to have the military covenant honoured. Only today I read that the Navy has had to escort some Russian warships out of the Channel, and that at the same time our Typhoon squadrons are being scrambled to escort probing Russian aircraft out of our airspace. So we definitely need, the peace dividend was all very well, but we need to be able to defend ourselves against anything that's coming to us. We don't want to be sending the Army and the Air Force out into other countries. We want to be able to defend our own airspace, our own seas. After all, we are a maritime nation, and we want to have boots on the ground if we need them.
Duncan Kerr for the Greens.
Yeah, we've promised that we would match what the Conservative Party defence expenditure is. I think the significant difference to the Green Party is, I'm not too sure 2% is just a figure plucked from the air, isn't it? There's a lot, in terms of military spending, we're one of the highest military spenders in Europe. But we believe that we live in a world where the risks are very different from the risks that generated some of the military expenditure in the past. ISIS, Al-Qaeda aren't terribly bothered that we've got nuclear weapons, for instance. So the Green Party, and I'll just read you a quote on this because you think the Green Party sort of opposed nuclear weapons. Here are, nuclear weapons have shown themselves to be completely useless as a deterrent to the threats and scale of violence we currently face or are likely to face, particularly international terrorism. That's not Caroline Lucas, that's Field Marshal Lord Brummel, former head of the Armed Forces. So the Armed Forces themselves are saying Trident nuclear weapon systems are no longer relevant to the threats that we now face as a country. So we need a force that can actually intervene early, but intervene to build the conditions under which peace becomes possible. We failed spectacularly to do that in Afghanistan. If we'd had a different approach, we might now not be faced with some of the consequences of the world that we are faced with. So we are pledged to continue expenditure at the current levels in the armed forces, but we are pledged to not commit to Trident, which could cost us up to £100 billion, and we are committed to exploring how we can try and prevent conditions arising which seed terrorists after terrorists after terrorists.
Bringing Tom Thornhill for the Liberal Democrats now.
Yeah, I think it wasn't a question on Trident, was it? But I suppose that does come into the broader picture as what sort of country we want to be. Personally, as in fact the Labour Party has said, I'm in favour of multilateral disarmament. So in other words, we reduce our military deterrent along with other societies around the world. But the issue of the defence spending, I really think it is just a number, the 2%. It's a reasonably good target. The freedoms that we have in this country, the freedoms we all take for granted every day to go about our lives, they are assured by our military. That they are the defence, they are the cost, if you like, of the freedoms we have. So the Liberal Democrats are opposed to any cuts to the defence budget. Whether or not we meet the 2%, I think is it's an issue up for discussion. I suspect that my party will not commit to the 2%, but what we will do is oppose any cuts to defence spending, because we believe that the freedoms that we all enjoy, that are so important to us, to our families, they are secured. Our insurance, if you like, is a strong military. So we will support that. No cuts to the defence budget under the Lib Dems.
Owen Patterson, the question was which party will commit to the 2% figure?
Well, I agree with many of the comments made so far. The first duty of the state is to defend the citizen. And I grew up under the hideous shadow of the Soviet Union. I was actually arrested in the Soviet Union for free trade activities when I went to Leningrad. And the colonel who arrested me then attacked me for what Mrs. Thatcher was doing in the South Atlantic. I wasn't what on earth he was talking about sending nuclear weapons to the South Atlantic. I mean, obviously there was no news, news blackout when you went down behind the Iron Curtain then. And at that stage, we were spending 5% of GDP on defence, along with many of our NATO allies facing down the Soviet Union. One of the great achievements was the three, really, Thatcher, Reagan and Pope John Paul, facing down the Soviet Union, and Gorbachev having the brains and the imagination to see that the game was up. And we went through an incredibly hairy period. I did a lot of business in Germany at the time. It was really sticky, but thanks, I think, to those four people, we came through it without some hideous conflict. I think we've then bluntly, in the West, been complacent. We've grabbed the peace dividend, and we're down to about 2% now. But sadly, it's tragic for us all, the world is probably a more dangerous place in a different way. We're not up against a lot of neurotic geriatrics in the Politburo. We're up against real crazes in ISIL. I mean, I think extreme Islamism is a real danger, not just across the Levant and the Middle East, but we're seeing evidence of it here. We have a gangster state developing in Russia. We've had the first breach of internationally established frontiers since the Second World War, and we've been able to do nothing about it. So I gave a speech in Washington. If you want to Google it up, go to UK 2020 or go to the Heritage Foundation. And I made it very clear, I think rather like the others, I don't have a hang-up about this 2%. We should spend what is necessary. And I'm not the person to go into the technology. whether it's new aircraft carriers, new strike aircraft, or I would think very much more importantly, in my opinion, down the road, is cyber and keeping ahead of the game. We know the Chinese are up to all sorts of activity on that front. Keeping ahead of intelligence. We see the catastrophe of what Snowden gave away, which has led to a real damage to our interests, and I think sadly large numbers of people are losing their lives. That is the place where we should be putting money. So my answer to you, if you elect me, is I will say we should spend what is necessary. And I said in Washington, I wouldn't be bound by some arbitrary percentage.
Please, can I
Unfortunately, time has caught up with us now. We've already overrun by about 35 minutes now. So I think I'll just wrap up by saying, first of all, thank you to the panel. I don't think anybody should underestimate how potentially nerve-wracking it can be, facing questions blind in that way. And thank you also for a fantastically organised and a brilliantly attended event. Thank you all very much.